On this week's episode of Hockey Inside Out, we recap the Montreal-Carolina game and Jesperi Kotkaniemi coming back to haunt the Habs once more. What's the takeaways from the West Coast trip and the trade deadline for the Montreal Canadiens? And finally, should the Canadiens medical staff take any blame for the number of games they've lost of manpower the last 2 years? Plus the posed questions on this week's episode of Hockey Inside Out. Welcome in to a new episode of Hockey Inside Out. I'm your host, Moe Khan, alongside Stu Cowan, Jack Todd. I thought we did trade Andrew Berkshire during the deadline day, which we did not do. But Andrew's back in the saddle. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you very much, Mo. Happy to be back.
All right, Jets, let's dive into it. Hurricanes Habs from Tuesday night. The Habs losing the shootout. Jesperi Kotkaniemi coming back to pull off John Leclerc again to kill off the Habs. Your takeaways from the game at the Bell Center on Tuesday nights?
It was an entertaining game. It was sitting in the press box. It was a lot of fun to watch. The overtime was fantastic. The shootout was exciting. It was a great game. And Jesperi Kotkaniemi hadn't done a whole lot up until the shootout. He was -1. He had just over 17 minutes of ice time. He did go 8-2 on faceoffs, but a lot of them were against Jonathan Drouin, who was 3-8. I mean, Jonathan shouldn't be playing center. They put him there out of necessity. But it was an entertaining game. I mean, the Canadiens jumped on Carolina early. They woke up after the first period. I was talking with Kotkaniemi after the game, and he said it's been a bit of a problem for Carolina this season that they start off slow against the lower-ranked teams in the NHL, but they're such a strong team, and they're a huge team. They got a big roster. They picked it up and turned it on. It was sort of funny because they were waiting outside the Carolina locker room after the game, and there's maybe 5 of us, all Montreal media, and when we walked in, there was no players left. They'd gone. Hurricanes aren't used to having any media around them, right? Especially on the road. Maybe in Carolina, there would be one reporter. And Kotkaniemi was out in the back hall doing a TV interview. And when he walked in, he saw us and he rolled his eyes like, oh, no, I thought I had made a clean escape. I wouldn't have to talk to any Montreal media. But then he was great talking with us. He was, the smile that he's always had. He said he tried to not celebrate too much after the goal, out of sort of respect for the Canadiens. Had nothing but good things to say about the Canadiens. They have a lot of young players. He says the future looks bright for them. I asked him, though, I said, did you ever wonder what it would be like if you had been in Montreal with Marty St. Louis as the coach? And he said, I never think about that. He says, I'm happy where I am. He said he likes playing with Rod Brindamore. So for Kotkaniemi, it was he said he ranked it among his top 10 career highlights, scoring that shootout goal at the Bell Center. But it was a fun night. And for Canadiens fans who were cheering for the tank, it was a perfect night minus the 1 point they picked up for the shootout loss. But this team, 10 guys on the injured list, and they just keep battling and fighting and competing against a team they had no business even taking 1 point against. And that just says a lot about Marty St. Louis and how he has these players buying into what he's selling, and they all want to play for him.
It also says a lot to me about JF Hoole. All these guys that are coming up from Laval after years, as long as it's been the 21st century, it's always been, we're not doing a good job developing players. They get here, they're not ready, they don't fit into the system, whatever. Every guy who's come up this year that I can recall has plugged and played. It's just boom. And a lot of times, like last night, they provide the energy. Peca and these guys are just terrific. They cause trouble. They do what fourth liners are supposed to do. They give the team a huge infusion of energy, and they give it some offense. Without the offense they got from them last night, there wouldn't have been a shootout because they wouldn't have survived regulation time. So the first thing I would say is they seem finally to have solved that problem in Laval or whatever their minor league team is, as long as Hoole stays there. But if he keeps coaching like this, that might not be too much longer. The other thing I have a pet peeve in the shootout that I just want to get off my chest because that drives me nuts. It's Josh Anderson last night. The guy, to me, has 2 big assets when he plays. He can skate, and he's got a shot. So what does he do? He skates like I would skate. Da-da-da-da-da-da, back and forth, yada, yada. What am I going to do? Oh, I think I'll do this little half-hearted squib shot here. And he doesn't score. Of course he didn't score, fool. When they first brought this in, you would see a lot of this. Guys were trying all kinds of things when the shootout first came in. And one night, I remember Kovalev was like the Canadiens' second shooter or something. He takes off like a freaking rocket. He skates in about 15 feet out, wrister, bang, I'm like, there, right there. Copy this, do what Kovalev did. Jesus, Brett Burns, who's a defenseman, did it last night. And I don't know what Anderson was thinking, but now when he came out there, I was like, geez, why hasn't he been used on the shootout? And then he answered the question for me. It took him half an hour to do it, but that it just drives me crazy. There's one guy, Suzuki can do it. His hands are so good that he can get away with playing the stuff and still score, but Anderson is just fooling around.
Yeah, if you've got the hand of Suzuki, obviously you can take it slow and make 1,000 moves and still make goalies look foolish. But for most guys, the best bet is to skate in quick, get the goalie moving, and take a good shot, whether that's cutting across the middle or going down in a straight line and make them telescope back into the net to cover their bases. I think if you see Josh Anderson on breakaways and partial breaks, you see why he is not really using the shootout that often. It's not necessarily in his toolhouse. He has a good shot, but I don't think it's necessarily accurate. Most of his goals are like bang-in rebounds kind of thing, doing good work around the net. Not very many snipes for Josh Anderson, at least this year. But I thought it was a great game overall. I loved seeing how great Alex Belzile and Michael Pezzetta continue to play. I think Pezzetta is a different player now that Belzile is in the lineup. You just see so many games early in the season where Pezzetta was just there. He was just a guy. And once in a while he'd get into a fight, but he wasn't really accomplishing anything. Now with Belzile on his line there, he's making plays. And you see the value of having a fourth line that knows what it's supposed to do. And it's not a mix of three players that don't mesh like Jake Evans, Michael Pezzetta, and Juraj Slavkovsky. It just doesn't make any sense to have those three players together. They don't fit. They're, square blocks trying to go into round holes. This fourth line makes sense. It does what it's supposed to do. And that was a key to the Canadiens being competitive last night and competitive for the last, several weeks has been that fourth line carrying a lot of play through their 10, 12 minutes a night. It's been pretty impressive. And as for Kotkaniemi, I know the Bell Center likes to have fun and boo guys, but I got to ask every fan who hates Jesperi Kotkaniemi, would you not have taken that money? Because anybody in their right mind's taking that money. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter about loyalty. That money was way more than he was going to get in Montreal, probably 6 times what he was going to get in Montreal. So I don't blame him one bit.
Yeah, Kotkaniemi was asked about the booing after the game, and he said, I actually like it. I wish they did it louder. Sort of, I guess, maybe feeds off of it. So, it's a tradition in Montreal, right? Players come back, whether they wanted to leave or didn't want to leave, they get booed by the Montreal fans. It's a tradition now at the Bell Center for whatever reason. But, Andrew, you took the words out of my mouth. Michael Pezzetta since Alex Belzile has joined the Canadiens has been a different player. They're feeding off each other. They're friends. They used to play together in Laval. They know each other well on and off the ice, and it's really, really showing. And Alex Belzile, what a wonderful story he's turned out to be. 31 years old with 3 goals this season, the first 3 goals he's ever scored in the NHL. Just a guy who never gave up, kept plugging. And if he doesn't inspire guys in the Canadiens room and make them realize how lucky and fortunate they are to be playing in the NHL, I don't know who will. And I think that has rubbed off on the players. I think a lot of the guys who had an easier road to the NHL, the first round picks, look at him and go, wow, look what this guy's gone through to get here. And he never gave up. And Marty St. Louis had a great line earlier this season. Says, too many people in life, whether they're hockey players or whatever, give up on their dreams too early. And as a result, they never get there. So what a great story. It's like a movie script what Alex Belzile is doing this year. And also Raphael Harvey-Pinard. What a great story he is. He's on pace for like a 40-goal season over an 82-game season. And I tweeted last night, if you're coaching young hockey players and you're trying to tell them, move your feet, and they don't understand what exactly you mean, tell them to watch Raphael Harvey-Pinard play hockey. His feet are constantly in motion. He never stops working. He never stops busting his butt. And I don't know if Alex Belzile has a future with the Canadiens. I'm not sure if Michael Pezzetta does, depending what happens during the summer and over the off season. But Raphael Harvey-Pinard, I'd be shocked if he's not on the Canadiens when the season starts next year.
So you bring up Michael Pezzetta in this whole process right now. Quickly, guys, these final 18 games here, could he – you mentioned the point that maybe he may not be back, but could he cement his role and give the Canadiens thought to keep him in the big club come day one next October for the new season?
He could, but
I think the thing to focus on for that, he's solidifying a role in the NHL period, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's also one of those guys who can go up and down depending on how the roster shapes up for next season.
Yeah, I'd rather see a guy like him than some of the $5 million a year dead weight they've had around this season, one of whom was exiled to Dallas at the trade deadline. I just see so much more from well, he's not young, but the people coming up who know what it's like to be hungry still.
Right.
And Marty St. Louis deserves a lot of credit for that, because if you work hard and play hard, he's going to play you. He's going to play you. Michael Pezzetta was a healthy scratch a lot earlier in the season. He got his opportunity because of injuries, and he's shown, if you work hard and play hard for Marty St. Louis, you're going to play. And that's exactly what Kotkaniemi said after the game about Rod Brind'Amour. It's the same thing. As long as you work hard, he's happy. If you don't work hard, you're going to have a problem.
Well, I'll say this here, guys, to wrap it up. To Andrew's point, we would all take that money and go to Carolina and live some fantastic environments in Carolina with the weather, the food, and the lifestyle, and not be bothered and enjoy life. Well, as for the Montreal Canadiens, they completed their 4-game West Coast trip and had the deadline day as well involved. Besides us being miserable in Montreal for the weather that it was last week, the Habs got to enjoy some sun and fun and not have a really ideal road record that it was, beating San Jose, losing to the California teams such as LA, Anaheim, and Vegas. Similar thing. I looked back to it last year, guys. Similar parallel to where they were in terms of the West Coast trip to where they were against these teams. They beat San Jose last year. They lost to the Kings, lost to the Ducks, and lost to the Knights here. So what's your takeaways from this West Coast trip and the fact that they weren't as active during the deadline day?
My first takeaway from the trip, which we've already touched on, is that Marty St. Louis can coach. He is really a good coach. At the start of this year, I was getting stuff from people saying, well, when are they going to get a real coach? They've been bitching nonstop since I first started writing sports columns about the Canadiens bringing back the endless rotation of hacks, like, Michel Therrien gets his turn and so forth, and all these coaches who can't think outside the box. Now you get the guy who starts outside the box and stays there. And what he can do, because the one thing they've done this year, even with even dozen players at times on the injured list, everything else is they compete. I don't think there have been 5 games all season when they haven't competed, when they've looked really bad and really dead. And, you look around at a lot of the best teams in the league, they'll go in somewhere and get waxed 5-0 because they just didn't compete that night. And this is certainly not one of the best teams, but they're out there battling. And when they lose in San Diego and they win in San Jose, the next 2 games, they lose a couple tight, close games. In Las Vegas against the best team they faced on the trip, they fall behind early and they battle back. I'm ready to turn off the TV, but here they come again. And that's got to be St. Louis. It's just got to. I don't remember a team, as long as I've been watching them, who with relatively little can do so much. And, it starts in a lot of times with these fourth liners. Mike Matheson has just been superb. A lot of good things are happening among the players, obviously. They seem like a pretty tight group right now, but at least they don't quit. You get your money's worth every night. As for the trade deadline, it was quiet. I think quieter than we thought it would be. Disappointing in a way. I kind of feel like we touched on it before. If indeed there was a first-round draft choice offered for Josh Anderson, he should have taken it. But then, if it's offered from a team that's going to finish in the top 2, then it's probably not worth much. So it was a bit of a disappointment, but they got something for Dadonov, and I'll settle for that. I'm looking again, the moves that Hughes has made in a very short time, 3 brilliant moves: Doc, Matheson, and Sherratt to Florida for a first. And you can run on that for a while. To me, he's good for at least another year without doing one more good move. And a lot of other solid things, too, like the waiver pickup of Jonathan Kovacevic. Jesus. To get a guy like this, a 6'5" player who, can make a good first pass. He can win a fight, as we saw, even if he shouldn't have had to fight it. It's moves like this, like small but very astute moves that tell me he's on the job.
Yeah, I think the one thing to remember with the trade deadline is the whole, in terms of what the Canadiens lost by not doing, the only real one is Sean Monahan, right? And as soon as the league sent out that memo that they would be highly scrutinizing trading of players who might not play in the regular season so that you wouldn't have to worry about their cap hit and then they'd come back in the playoffs. That destroyed any value the idea of trading for Sean Monahan had. If he has a chance to come back this year at all, it probably would be in the playoffs. So like maybe there would have been a bite there somewhere from a team looking to circumvent the cap a little bit. But as soon as the NHL sent out that memo, like it just wasn't going to happen. If they were to get anything, it wouldn't have been worth much. And they already got a first round pick in that trade to take on Sean Monahan, right? So you can look at that still as a pretty significant win. They won on both sides of that trade. Edmondson, sure, maybe offers were there. My understanding from what Kent Hughes said is they like him enough in the room and the kids like him enough that it's not worth trading him for an underwhelming return right now, which is probably what they were getting considering the back injuries. He's got another year on his contract. They can move him in the summer. They can move him next trade deadline. They've got lots of space to make that happen. It's really not something to stress about. Drouin is not going to be many offers. Hoffman and Armia, too many years left to move them right now. So it's one of those situations where there just wasn't an avenue for Hughes to make a big splash at this deadline. It's not like he had sellable assets of the value of Toffoli, Lehkonen, and Sherratt last year. So I understand being disappointed because of the standard set last year, and you want to move some players on a team where you're not competing for anything. But this is what he had to deal with this year. I think he did a good job with the cards that he was dealt. And the other thing is the highest draft pick to move in this upcoming draft still belongs to the Montreal Canadiens because of the Sherratt trade last year. So he's kind of done his work way ahead of time for this draft, which is a nice thing to see. As for St. Louis, I agree with Jack. We've been saying all year that the one thing this team continues to avoid is that loser mentality, right? Where losses become okay. What we saw under Dom Ducharme, where guys are they accepted a loss almost before they were on the ice. Now, even in games where they don't really have a chance to win, they give themselves the idea of a chance to win by competing so hard. And, as much as it might not be good for the tank, I think it has a lot of value for young players in the lineup right now to continue having that positive attitude as they develop as NHLers.
I'm surprised Monahan didn't get traded to Arizona. Isn't that where all guys who have big contracts and can't play end up? He could have gone there and joined Shea Weber. Would have been along with all the other guys who have ended their careers in Arizona who never played. But, with Kent Hughes, the thing I liked about the trade deadline is he didn't make trades just for the sake of making trades, which I think was one of the big problems with Marc Bergevin. He would make trades at the deadline, like get the guys like Dwight King and Ott and guys like that and bring them in when he probably didn't need them. It probably disrupted the chemistry in the locker room. You look now at what Toronto did with all the new players they brought in at the trade deadline. How's that going to work in the room? How's that going to affect the chemistry with the Leafs? To me, that seems like they made a lot of trades for the sake of making trades and a GM there trying to save his job. But I'm happy with Kent Hughes. There was nothing, if he had been offered a first-round pick for Anderson, maybe he would have done it. Maybe he wasn't offered that pick. I wouldn't be in a rush to trade Josh Anderson. He's got time still. He's got a few years left on his contract, but the value for him might go up as time goes on if indeed you do decide to trade him. And with Dadonov, they took on Dadonov to get rid of Weber's contract, which was huge. And then they dealt him for Gurianov, who's a number 12 overall pick, 25 years old. The talent's obviously there. And they're hoping, this is part of Kent Hughes' strategy, is getting young guys like Kirby Dach, who didn't, or even Mike Matheson to an extent, who maybe didn't work out as well as expected where they were, and hoping that Marty St. Louis sort of waves his magic wand and gets these guys to go. And Gurianov has the last 18 games of this season to show that he is the guy who was a 12th overall pick and has that talent. $2.9 million he's making. They have arbitration rights on him after this season if they want to keep him. If they don't want to keep him, you just let him go. And so the Weber contract's gone. There's no risk. It's a riskless move, and it's a smart move by Kent Hughes, and he's made a lot of smart moves. And you're talking about Marty St. Louis as a coach when he was hired. Coming from coaching his kids in Bantam. And you're wondering, boy, he's got no experience, great player. But, Wayne Gretzky was arguably the greatest player ever. He wasn't a very good coach. But Marty's come in, and he's just, the players are buying what he's selling. And that's so important in today's NHL or any pro sports. The players have to believe what the coach is telling them. They didn't believe it with Dominic Ducharme. Pierre Gervais' book, he said it was basically the veterans that were coaching the team when they went on that Stanley Cup run. It wasn't Dominic Ducharme, the players that sort of tuned them out. But there's only one way to get experience, right? You got to do the job. I wouldn't be sitting here talking with you guys today if Red Fisher hadn't given me a chance when I was a kid with no experience. The only way to get experience is to do it. And Marty St. Louis is doing it. And he's very, he's very modest too. Like he says, I don't know everything. Like I'm still learning. He's reading coaching books. He's listening to other coaches. But he's able to relate to the players, and that's so big in today's thing. And that California trip, the weather unfortunately wasn't very good for the Canadiens there. It was cold and sort of miserable. It rained in San Jose, but the last 3 losses, all 1-goal losses. They're winless in their last 4, all 4 1-goal losses. It's sort of the perfect. I hate tanking, as I've mentioned in this show before, but it's sort of the perfect. Things are going perfectly as far as their chances of winning the draft lottery. They're competing, they're playing hard, they're battling hard. They just don't have enough talent to win a lot of games, and they got a lot of good teams they're playing. Their last 18 games, only 2 teams they play with losing records. So they're going to lose a lot of games, but they're going to compete and they're going to battle. And if you're a fan paying money to go to the Bell Center, if you went there for that game against Carolina, it was fun. It was fun to watch. You go back to the end of Dominic Ducharme's reign, it was horrible to watch. In the press box, we were going ourselves, oh my God, we got 30 more games of this to watch. Thank God we're getting paid for it. But they're fun to watch with Marty St. Louis. It doesn't matter who is in the roster. And he's got basically half of an AHL team on the ice competing against the best teams in the NHL, which is really impressive.
Well, for the Montreal Canadiens, they may be fun to watch, and the thing is to look forward to if you're Habs fans that they're going to get better and better under Martin St. Louis if he's given the time, which he will be given the time. And Stu, to your point, Wayne Gretzky coaching the Coyotes alumni team with Weber and others will be fun to watch. But for the Habs, going towards the final 18 games, we'll find out what they do. They have a tough road schedule coming up overall. We'll see what they do in the next 4 or 5 games against the Rangers, Devils, and Avalanche name in the next week or so. Well, on to the final question for this week's episode of Hockey Inside Out. The Canadiens have lost a lot of man games this year. Last time I checked, they're at 360 plus, Columbus included, Washington included in the top 3. So, gentlemen, should the Canadiens training staff and medical staff take blame for the fact they've lost so many manpower games the last 2 seasons?
I think there should be some sort of internal review. I think that you have to do that anytime you have back-to-back seasons where last year they set records for man games lost by over 100. This year, not that bad, but again, lots of major injuries, a lot of them to young players as well. I think the number of young players who are out is a little concerning, but at the same time, this is one of those things where I think because injuries can be so random and, it's not something you can necessarily control a lot of the time, the fan outrage is a little bit hard to justify because this is something that we just flat out don't have the information to make actual accusations about. I think a review makes sense, but the only situation this year where I think you can point to the Canadiens and say maybe they mismanaged that was when Matheson came back too early from the abdomen issue that he was having and then immediately went back on I believe it was LTIR for a stretch. Maybe Monahan as well, but then they said that he injured himself in a different area while rehabbing the foot injury. So it's how can you control that? There's certain things that you can do for sure, but sometimes players just get hurt. Monahan has a long history of injuries. Could the Canadiens have actually put him in a situation where he wasn't going to get injured? We just don't know. We don't have that information. So unfortunately, it's an area where you kind of have to defer to the medical experts that they have until we have information that refutes their expertise, right? If it was the Pittsburgh Penguins situation with Sidney Crosby, I guess it was almost a decade ago now when he got concussed, was clearly concussed in the outdoor game by David Steckel. They let him play the next game and he got concussed again by Victor Hedman and then lost time, came back, played more concussions, more issues, missed almost 2 years of his career, only to find out that he had an undiagnosed broken neck. That kind of thing is crazy, right? We're not necessarily seeing that with the Montreal Canadiens. I think it's the combination of so many players on that roster sacrifice their bodies to get to that Stanley Cup final, and you got guys like Byron, Gallagher, Price, Weber, who are either never the same or had to retire because of the injuries that they put themselves through to get there. That combined with a run of injuries over the last couple of years and COVID, it's just, I don't know what we're actually dealing with here. And I feel like it's kind of premature or irresponsible to actually lay blame, but ask questions for sure.
I'd be surprised if there's not changes to the medical staff in the offseason. I really will, because it's a physical game. There's going to be injuries. Guys are going to take slap shots off the foot and break your bones, or they're going to separate a shoulder getting checked into the board. They're going to have concussions. It's part of the game. But it's the guys who are hurt, come back, and then get hurt again, bringing guys back too early. You mentioned about Sean Monahan. He played at least 3 games on a broken foot. I remember the game in Calgary. We saw him walking by the media room. He had a cast on, and we were all looking at each other. I guess he's not playing tonight. And then he did play. And then when he did the interviews after the game, he had the cast back on his foot. I understand why he wanted to play the game in Calgary after he spent so many years there, and he wanted to come back and sort of a homecoming game. Okay. But then he played 2 more games again with the same thing. Cast on, cast off. And then he was out. And the thing is, they're saying that the injury he has now is different, but anybody who's had an injury, you compensate, right, for other things. I'm not a pro athlete. I remember I had a high ankle sprain years ago, went for physio, threw it, and finished. And then the guy said, okay, now we're going to work on your hip. And I was like, I didn't hurt my hip. And he said, well, you've been walking crooked for 2 months. And he grabbed my hip, and I almost hit the roof. So I asked that question to Ken Hughes at this news conference, is it a compensation injury? And he didn't rule it out 100%. He said, we don't think so. So I just don't understand why, when Monahan's such a valuable commodity, why, okay, let him play the game in Calgary, maybe on the broken foot. I'm sure he begged and pleaded to play, but then shut him down. Get the broken foot healed. He's had surgery on both hips. And if you're compensating for your foot, a lot of that's going to be on your hip. So I wonder, and the other thing is, just come clean with what the injuries are. Like, they lead to so much speculation. Like, Kirby Dach had a virus and then it became a lower body injury, or vice versa. Or like,
that one's weird
here. Like, just be honest about what's going on. It'll eliminate a lot of the speculation about what's going on. And then you go back, Cole Caulfield kept playing after twice popping his shoulder back in by himself when the team's already out of the playoffs. Brendan Goulet, on the West Coast trip, obviously suffered a shoulder injury in that big hit near the end of the first period. He continued to play the whole game. And then after that, he's out again. Matheson missed games early in the season with his abdominal thing. Then he had a groin injury. He missed 4 games with that. He played 1 game. Then he was out for 13 games. Gallagher, the same thing. He's been in and out of the lineup. So I think it's just it's the preventative measures that are the concerning thing to me. I mean, injuries are going to happen, but guys they don't seem to protect the players from themselves. Guys want to play. Sean Monahan wanted to play in Calgary. Brendan Gallagher always wants to play. Caden Goulet had missed a lot of time with a knee injury. When his shoulder was hurt, I'm sure he didn't want to go out again. But you got to protect these guys from themselves. And the Canadiens don't do that, and they paid a heavy price for it. I mean, if Monahan's other injury is sort of a compensation injury, here's a guy you could have got a first-round pick for. A broken foot, you sit him out for 6 weeks, put it in a cast, it's healed, and let's go. We're back. So I think I'd be surprised if there's not some changes in the medical staff during the offseason after what Ken Hughes has seen since he's taken over here.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, actually. I'm a bit hesitant in the medical area partly because the league is so closed. I mean, look at the Super Bowl and Pat Mahomes, who are getting hourly bulletins on his high ankle sprain, If he had been an NHL player in the Stanley Cup Finals, we have been lucky to even know if it was upper body or lower body, or maybe they would have called it a virus.
They would have called it an upper body.
Upper body virus.
It's been a problem since I remember Mike Farber, when he was in the job I occupied, calling it the diagonal theory, which is then I remember seeing Benoit Brunet driven into the boards once, comes off holding his left shoulder, obviously collarbone, something in that area. They tell us it's the right ankle. So Farber says that's the diagonal theories. They go as far as they can from where the injury actually happened, and they expect you to believe that. So this has been, and it's pretty much strictly an NHL problem. I follow the NBA closely, where, by the way, I think anyone who's interested in the NHL and its injuries should keep an eye on the NBA, because they have a problem. They have a major grade A problem, which is on any given night, at least half the stars in that league are out. And sometimes it's really long-term out. You can go down any list of the absolute top players in the league, and with 2 or 3 exceptions, they all miss significant time with scary injuries. And as somebody who used to play the sport and all that, I think what's happening is reaching the point with bodies where they're at the absolute limit of what the human body can do. You look at this guy, Zion Williamson, who came into the league, who was supposed to be the next great sensation. he spent more time on the disabled list than he has playing. And it started at North Carolina, at Duke, when he made a move with so much force that he exploded his Nike sneaker. And this is the kind of, you see it a bit more in basketball than you do in hockey because you can see the bodies more and you kind of know what's happening. But I think the same thing is happening in hockey. They're right at the fringe of what you can do. And from what I know about guys training and spending a lot of time around gyms, what do you see guys do? They're guys. They're pumping as much weight as they can, and they're concentrating on strength. And unless they're compelled to by the training staff, they aren't even going to try to touch their toes. Not even dreaming of like serious flexibility exercises, which I think the balance there has to be shifted to flexibility away from strength as much as you can get the players to do it. But then I agree with Stu. I think the area they really have to look at is the decision-making about the injured player. Something is wrong there, whether it's the advice they're getting from the trainer, the advice they're getting from the medical staff, and something has to change because every case that Stu mentioned is true. They let guys. I mean, you just cringe when you think about Caulfield playing with that shoulder when his agent is saying he's wincing every time he goes down. This is where I may expect some movement in the offseason. It might be unfair, but or it might be just a matter of the process. It might be, Kent Hughes has to say, okay, guys, when somebody's hurt now, they sit until we sit down, we talk with the medical staff, and then we make a decision. Because the way it's being done now, just sending the guy back out on the ice, taking huge chances with major commodities here.
Well, Gooley the other night, it was obvious his shoulder was hurt bad. I mean, he couldn't shoot the puck the last two periods. He'd have chances to wind up and slap it, and he would pass it instead. And they kept, the season's over. You're not fighting for a playoff spot. Why would you risk this, especially when you've already seen the shoulder issue with Jack Guy and the shoulder issue with Caulfield? And, you're talking about the groins and the hips and that. I had an interesting conversation with Jake Allen at one of those Kraft Hockey Ball games in the preseason. He thinks a lot of the groin and hip issues that players are having, young players in the NHL now, is because they've only played hockey since they were like 8 years old, 12 months of the year. And skating's not a natural motion for your hips. And he thinks it's a lot of that is just kids playing too much hockey, not playing other sports or develop other muscles in their body. And just one last point, you talk about not being forthcoming on injuries. The NHL is in bed with gambling. They've gone all in on gambling. Yeah. And if they want to go all in gambling, they got to provide detailed injury reports like what the NFL does. The NFL, the reason Mahomes, that we had hourly updates on his high ankle sprain is because people bet on the NFL. That's one of the reasons it's so popular. And they want to provide their fans who bet with as much information as possible. And I laugh, the Canes talk about, lower body injury. We're outside the Canadiens locker room when we see the media guys, when we see the injured players coming out after the game, or anybody who's seen Brendan Gallagher around town or whatever. Brendan Gallagher's got a boot on his foot. It's a high ankle sprain. Sapkowski's got a knee brace. Gooley had a knee brace. Evans has a knee brace. We know what their injuries are. Just say it's a knee. I don't understand anybody who sees these guys on the street, sees them walking around with a knee brace on. I don't, or at the game. I don't understand why they're, and especially if you want to go all in on gambling, you got to provide detailed injury reports.
Yeah, so you just took my point about the NFL gambling perspective, but also last week the NFLPA released its report from its players on everything with every professional team in the NFL, how they were ranked, and the medical departments were destroyed by a lot of players. So I would be curious if the NHLPA, which is doing a little bit of a change with the leadership council, if they're going to send up player reports to ask for feedback on medical staff and what they do. And I'd be curious to know how the Montreal Canadiens would rank amongst the NHL teams right now, if they would be at the top or at the bottom moving forward. So that's something to look out for the future of the NHL moving ahead. Well, that would do for this week's episode of Hockey Inside Out. Don't forget to like and subscribe on our YouTube page for all the Hockey Inside Out episodes that we have. And don't forget to submit your questions and comments. We look forward to conversing about that in a future episode. And sign up for the newsletter at MontrealGazette.com/newsletters for full episodes and bonus episodes as well. Head on by Hockey Inside Out for all of that plus more. On behalf of Jack, Andrew, and Stu, we wish you a great week. We'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.